Hi, welcome to AWS reInvent, and this particular one that we're going to do a recap on is around the core architectural pieces. You may have seen the other one around machine learning, but this one's more about core architecture. So my name is Gregson. I'm a senior cloud architect here at DoiT, and I'm joined with the lovely Avi. So Avi, do you want to give a quick introduction of who you are?
Hey guys, I'm Avi Keinan, also a senior cloud architect in DoiT International, based in Israel. And I was at Vegas with Jason. We spent the time there together.
Great. And you're also a community hero for AWS as well?
AWS, AWS community hero.
Wow, excellent. Right. So today, I thought we'd talk about a few bits and pieces that really appealed to me, might hopefully appeal to you. So, and the agenda sort of breaks down into sort of four main areas, and there's a couple of little outliers on there as well. So we're going to talk about some storage elements that happened at reInvent, some database and analytics, some networking IoT, monitoring and security, always really important, which is why we're sort of putting that towards the end. And then we'll talk a little bit about sort of migrations, community, and a little bit about the new well-architected pillar as well. So, so just really a discussion, and without further ado, let's step right into it. So storage, really. So there was a particular one that sort of resonated with you, and I think I've seen a lot of these myself in terms of customer interactions, and that is the new recycle bin for EBS snapshots. So essentially, trying to solve one of those problems that we all see. So what do you think of this one, Abby?
I think it's a great feature, especially because now you have this retention period that if you accidentally delete something, you can restore it. And I heard this so many times people reach out and said, listen, I accidentally deleted 3 terabytes of backups. Can we check with AWS if we can restore it? The answer is no, by the way. Once you delete something, it's actually deleted. So it's a nice and a great feature. They launched another storage class for snapshots. So it used to cost around $50 per terabyte in EU and US regions, and now they launched another storage tier that is 75% more cheaper. It's called the archive storage tier. There is a minimum retention period. There is data retrieval fee, but if I have a snapshot which is going to be used for long-term storage, then it's pretty much like the infrequent access storage class in S3. So if you need to back up something for a long term, you have the option now. Nice.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that I particularly like about this is that, I don't know about you, but I've seen many customers with several thousands of snapshots in their environment costing an absolute fortune. And some of that is based on a naivety in terms of understanding what snapshots actually are in terms of incrementals. And some of it is just like, oh, we didn't even know about it. It didn't realize that there were so many. I had one customer with over 7,000 snapshots going back to 2017. So, that's an easy way to save some money by just removing the stuff that they don't need. I think, something like this will save a lot of support tickets at the end of the day from Amazon, having to solve exactly the problem that you said at the beginning, which is I've deleted a load of stuff I shouldn't have done. And the other side of it is that cost optimization in terms of you should be doing the right things in the right time at the right places. And here's a tool to help you do it. So I'm not sure about how much this will be abused in terms of recycle bin. If you look at the way when Windows first introduced a recycle bin, or it might have been even earlier, it might have been Macintoshes or whatever, people started using recycle bins as storage mediums. Rather than actually, emptying their recycle bins. But hey, it's a step in the right direction. If it helps customers be able to save the right things in the right places and keep that information, that data safe, then great. I don't know how it's going to help with sort of ransomware or anything else like that.
Yeah, I don't think it will help. Just if you delete something and then you get errors from your Jenkins system, with the exception that they can't find an image, an AMI, then okay, let's restore it from the recycle bin.
Well, yeah. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I suppose the next one is sort of Amazon FSx for Open ZFS. Easy for anybody to say. So this is their fully managed storage built on ZFS file system. So for me, it's one of those genuinely exciting elements for a couple of reasons. One, introducing the community or reintroducing them to Open ZFS in terms of they're able to start using these protocols. Particularly useful for Windows in terms of supporting NFS 4.2, because there was always that issue with how to mount shares and everything else in Windows. But for the majority of people that aren't using Windows, I think it's a nice addition to the storage fleet as well. And I think for me, one of the nice, well, not exciting, but mildly interesting, shall we say, is using the Graviton processors underneath it as well. So for me, it shows a bit more of a commitment to Graviton, actually building services on top of it. And obviously, the benefits of Graviton is bringing those costs down and improving the performance. So, yeah, how about yourself?
It looks like the entire AWS infra, like they move everything to Graviton. Before reInvent, they launched Lambda on Graviton. And maybe, I don't know, but maybe like the first requirement is if you build something on AWS, it should run on Graviton. So it's another nice feature. I think it's the only way to connect Linux and Windows with NFS or not. I'm not sure if that's the only way.
Yeah, I mean, there are some workarounds that you can do, but they're very clunky. They're not well supported, and they're certainly not native to Windows. But it is, with Open ZFS and supporting, I think it's either 4.1 or 4.2, one of the two is that Windows, certainly I think from 2016, might be earlier, too many years old, but can natively attach to network attached storage anyway. So, and what it does is it just brings that sort of seamless integration between a central storage medium between Windows and Linux, so they can both consume the same thing natively, rather than you've got to put a patch in, a workaround, and all these other bits and pieces. All get very messy, and we all know that looks like in terms of production when it's all hit the fan and everybody's trying to work out what's going on. So yeah, for me, it's a great little tool. I'm sure that there'll be an awful lot of customers using Open ZFS anyway. Right, next. Yeah, so Glacier, S3 Glacier for best practices, and their new instant retrieval storage class. What do you think about that?
We don't see it on a daily basis. We work with customers that usually startups, so they don't store historical resources. I remember that in one of the previous reInvents, when they entered the track, the semi-track, when they introduced the snowmobile. And then they shared a video of a company that captures photos via satellites. And this is an example for a company that need to use Glacier. Like we have tons of data. For us, we don't see customers that use Glacier, almost maybe one or two from all of our DoiT customers. So if you handle historical data, if you work with tapes, if you still have tapes in your organization, this is probably a new feature for you that allows you to store data in a cheaper way.
Yeah.
And also to store data faster, because in Glacier, when you want to restore something, you have two options: pay a lot of money or wait a lot of time. So it's a new way to combine between the two, that you will pay less and get it faster. So in general, it's nice. We don't see it in use because most of our customers are startups. That's it from my point of view.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, it's nice to see that there's some cost savings that can be made if you use it properly. Bringing down that storage cost is always great. I think certainly a lot of the mistakes I see around using Glacier is that people almost see it as a backup utility, which it obviously isn't, because the cost to get your data, if you're in that sort of almost panic mode of get me the data quickly, it's all in Glacier, will end up costing you an absolute fortune. So that's my only caveat around these sort of things, is just use it as it was intended to be used. And it's not a get out of jail free backup system. It's, like you said at the beginning, it's an archiving solution where A, you need to keep it for whatever reason, or B, more importantly, in terms of The use case, it's around compliance and regulatory parts where you have to keep.
If you need to store data for 7 years or something
Correct.
like that.
Yeah, for the life of the policy or whatever it may be. So, yeah, that can get quite difficult in terms of sorting out solutions like that. And this certainly opens up that door to have that available to you. If you need to go and get it for whatever reason, it's there and you can get it quickly. Just don't try and use it as a backup solution. So, yeah, great stuff.
I would automate the restore process because you can make errors, like critical errors or expensive errors.
Yep.
So if you backup in any way you want, upload the files in any way you want to Glacier, but there is the restore process. I think it should be automatically to reduce errors.
Yeah. Great stuff. Great. Okay, so now we have another announcement, which is the Simplify Access Management for data stored in S3. So this is the ability to actually remove or disable the access control list that you've got stored on S3 buckets. I don't know, for me it feels like the right thing to do in terms of providing some service like this, because it's going to reduce the support costs both to Amazon partners and everybody else in there. I'm not sure long term, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is it something that can be abused? But yeah.
I'm afraid it's going to be that people might abuse it. They will disable the bucket policy for all the resources that they upload. But I do see people that are having troubles with the access control list, and it's hard to understand. Sometimes you want to restrict the access only to a specific user or specific role, and then by mistake you block everyone else, including yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So this thing happens, and we need to see how it will work out. I think that I'm not going to use it. I prefer to use the bucket policy. For me, it feels like much safer way. Like I have a firewall in front of my files. That's how I see it.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things that I think is, there's I can't remember how many it is now, 10, 12 different things that you have to do with root, in terms of closing an account and that sort of thing. And one of them was like getting your access back to an S3 bucket, which obviously causes all sorts of problems long term. People with MFA tokens that have run out, or they've got software-defined MFA tokens that are no longer installed on their phones, so they can't get access to root. And then, going through the Amazon support process in terms of, getting affidavit signed that you do actually own this account and everything else. It's obviously hugely expensive to Amazon for something that's relatively simple to solve, certainly from a technical point of view. But like yourself, I think one of the worries that I have about this is that as owner operators of this sort of thing, when you're really against the pressure and something's happening and you're not quite sure, what you tend to do is sort of hit it with a brick, really. And this looks like one of those hammers. You hit it, it's just like, okay, yeah, what's happening here? Don't know, right, reset everything and off we go. Now, that can have all sorts of unintended consequences. So for me, something like this, I think, is a really good tool for that break glass, get out of jail, it's all horribly gone wrong. What I would like to have seen on top of this is that actually I've made a mistake and I should revert it back. So there doesn't seem to be any way of, I wouldn't say backing up because that's the wrong phrase, but there doesn't seem to be any way of saying, okay, I've disabled the ACLs and I've now got bucket owner enforced connection to it, or object writer enforced connections to it. That's fine. But actually I've made a mistake because I didn't consider these other 5 parts of the business that are actually using this. I'd like to just put it back to how it was and we'll work through the problem properly. So I think, whilst when you hit that button that says disable the access control list, there's another checkbox that comes up and says, are you sure, basically. I think a lot of people, even though they say, yes, I'm sure, just delete it, will actually not be that sure. And there really wouldn't be a way of understanding what that is unless you're going through, if you've done this in Terraform, CloudFormation, whatever that may be. But we're talking about the history here, so that's possibly not really going to be a solution to solve it. So I like the idea. I just think it will be abused. And I think that at the end of the day, I think customers could end up suffering more problems than it actually solves anyway.
It adds another layer of complexity for companies that onboard to the cloud. Because if you're like an enterprise, you have this thinking that, okay, I'm protected, I'm behind a firewall. And then you start working with S3 and there's no firewall. So it's another way to make things more complicated.
Yeah, and I think, to your point about enterprises, when they have acquisitions and they have all of these elements where they acquire companies and they take ownership of things. So this could be really useful for enterprises in terms of saying, okay, all this belongs to me now. I don't care what access controllers you've got in there, it's all mine. That solves that problem quite readily. But yeah, for me, I prefer a little bit of guidance along the way. It's like, we're going to protect you from doing the silly things yourselves. And this thing seems a bit of a big hammer to solve a relatively small problem in terms of how to solve it, but not necessarily in terms of its importance. It's just remediation going through the access control list and that sort of side of it. But yeah, great. Thanks for your input. Appreciate it. Moving on to another S3 one that I thought was really, really useful and sort of dovetails neatly into sort of modern architecture and that sort of thing. So there's been, Event Bridge launched recently, what's that, 2019, somewhere around there. But, taking notifications from an event that happens in S3 and then putting it into SNS has been a standard way of working for some time now, and it's the sort of de facto standard. Then Event Bridge came along, and then it's almost like they didn't really consider that Event Bridge would be there right here, right now. So you had to do all these horrible sort of workarounds, and I wouldn't say patching, but this extra layer of architecture and complexity. So now using S3 event notifications with Event Bridge, really, really nice idea, and really starting to sort of hook the two back up quite nicely without having to create loads of extra layers of cruft and code and shims to put in there. What are your thoughts?
I used to work a lot with S3 and Lambda. I think I also shared a blog post, I'm not sure, about how to modify headers automatically when you upload new object to S3. And you can only use one Lambda function, or you can only use, they changed it recently, when you work with event notification. And now, using Event Bridge, you can do more than that. So it's going to be a cool feature that will allow you eventually to do more stuff. For example, if I want to add headers, so this is one Lambda function. But what if I want to purge or invalidate CloudFront distribution automatically? So I don't need to write a Lambda function that will invoke two different Lambda functions or start messing with SNS. I can start doing that with Event Bridge. So it's a cool feature. It's going to save time, more managed, less coding. So it's another way to work with S3 on your resources and automatically modify the files once they are uploaded.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the more that we can simplify these things, I don't mean specifically go down a completely no-code route, but the more that we can take out some of these little extra layers of complexity that you have to add in there to do what you essentially think is the right thing to do. Take a notification, post it somewhere. Where can I post it? Well, I can put it into a queue, a notification, Kafka, whatever. Actually, Event Bridge is there, globally scalable, bridge for events. Let's put it in there. Oh, you can't. So it's really nice that, this sort of iterative approach to helping customers do this sort of thing. Great stuff. Next topic of the day, we're looking at databases and analytics, and more around sort of really serverless, really. There's a lot of new serverless elements coming out. Specifically, one that sort of pricked my attention was the Redshift for serverless. I don't know if this is in preview. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about it, Avi.
So it's in preview. And it looks like all the new products, all AWS new products are now in preview first. I think that in the past they used to run a trial with several users, with several companies. And now they just say, okay, everyone will use it and we will learn from the support tickets and from the bugs that we see. So it's a change. And the huge difference is it's like Redshift Spectrum, basically, that you can scan S3 data, but the speed of the query, the time it takes Redshift to process the query depends on the number of nodes that you are running. So now when you can use serverless, you don't need to manage, first, you don't need to manage nodes. And second, you can run fast queries much faster because they generate the nodes at the background, and it's entirely managed for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And I think one of the elements that it's solving is not having to have that Redshift sitting around doing nothing all day, every day, except for when there's a workload to do that. So that's quite nice. I think one of the things I did like about it is that it is a preview, and there seems to be more and more stuff being released as preview rather than GA or released to certain private companies, and then off they go from there. But there's the $500 carrot at the end of it that says, if you want to use this, we'll give you $500 to go and play with it, sort of thing. So that's quite nice in some respects. But I think it could be one of those things that sort of leads you into trouble very quickly in terms of spend. But I think, it's solving a problem. It's moving some of that architecture away from just incumbents sitting there doing not a lot for most of the time, and just enabling customers to focus on that sort of their workloads really, rather than as Amazon call it, the undifferentiated heavy lifting. So get stuck into the work. Here's a whole series of tools for you. This can go and deliver this. So I like it. I like it a lot, actually.
Even if you provision a cluster and destroy it after a batch process, for example, you save time. It takes quite some time to provision a Redshift cluster.
Yeah, definitely. And the expertise as well. There's a lot of moving parts in Redshift in terms of the elements that you need to get right, the performance tuning and that side of it as well. So anything that makes that easier so that we can just get to that, taking from data to actual knowledge information that much quicker, great. And that's that much simpler as well. So it just simplifies the whole thing. So great stuff. Okay, there's another serverless one that I know very little about. I'm hoping you do, but serverless EMR. How's that good in any way, shape, or form?
Basically, when you configure your job, you need to define how the nodes are going to run. And there is a really good question is why. I'm a data engineer. I have zero knowledge on compute. I have zero knowledge on what is VPC? How do I connect to a VPC? And I'm trying to connect to a VPC, but I can't reach to S3. Maybe it's a security group issue or it's a routing issue. I have no clue. So for data engineers, can now use the serverless EMR also in preview. You don't need to play with hardware or compute anymore. You don't need to understand routing rules or firewall rules or security groups. You don't need to do any of that. Just set a permission and that's it. It will read the data from S3. Another great feature in preview, hopefully will be GA soon, and we will see. We'll see from customers what they will say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think this is going very much to what Venna was saying in terms of you've asked for it, so we've delivered it. That sort of thing. It's sort of going almost against the grain of here's a load of primitives. You can build this yourself. Customers are really struggling with it. They're really struggling with building well-architected environments that are secure. So I think this would really help in that sort of scenario, should we say? I think I notice is in preview, but there's no free $500 credit for you if you want to play with it. It's on your own volition. So hey, can't get free $500 with everything that to produce anyway. But hey, it's all good.
If you run something interesting, maybe the service team will reach out to you through your account manager. It's possible if you do something interesting.
Yeah. Especially if you can write a blog post on it, or in somehow. This is my architecture. Those great videos of this is my architecture. This is how we use serverless EMR. It's like, then it'd be great. Okay, so the one that sort of, I don't know. I don't think it's a good idea. I understand why it's an idea, but I don't think it's a good idea. And this is the RDS custom for Microsoft SQL Server. And that has gone GA. That's gone straight out into GA. They did have Oracle for RDS, custom Oracle. Sort of got that a bit, but I get along the same lines. So you've got a managed RDS server. It's running SQL Server, but you can now log in as SA onto those boxes and do certain things that you really should or shouldn't be doing to enable your business to be able to run their legacy applications or whatever it may be doing. And especially if it's using that SA role, which we all know is not a good place to do anything anyway. Doing anything as root is just bad. But yeah, there's some older applications that need to address. So yeah, your thoughts on RDS for SQL?
Looks like they build a product for lift and shift migrations or legacy migrations, mostly enterprises probably. I don't see any startups that are going to use this product. Maybe startups that work with legacy enterprises. I'm not sure, but if you need to implement this product, maybe you should rethink about the setup that you're going to do. But let me rephrase that. If you are here just for lift and shift, if this is entirely a migration to a managed service, go for it. If you have the option to rebuild it from scratch, do it.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one of those inflection points where it really does support lift and shift very well. My real concern is not about the lift and shift and enabling enterprises to take these legacy applications. It's that you see an awful lot of bad practice done when people that are sort of administering these things have got themselves into trouble in the first place by doing some of the bad practices around how to manage or not manage a SQL server. I'm not sure how much scope this new role has in terms of the customization of the databases. I've seen some horrific stories in terms of the builds that I've looked at for my customers and gone, whoa, okay, you've got it completely wrong. Or, there's some things here that you really shouldn't be doing. So I don't know how much of that is going to creep in, which will then, I don't think it'll materially affect anybody else, but it materially affect you and your perception of RDS anyway, especially if your application is misconfigured or configured in a way that's not actually really good for SQL in the first place. So I'd like to see some more detail around the things that you can't do even with custom RDS rather than the things that you can do. These are the things that we're going to prevent you from messing about with, like the replication pool partners or whatever that may be, just to protect the customer from themselves. So it's like, yeah, we've decided we only want it replicated once a day. And it's like, brilliant. And your RPO is and your RTO is. And so those sort of things. So, but yeah, interesting sort of land grab, I suppose. It's like you said, it's more for those enterprises as legacy applications that you just really can't move into SQL Server running on RDS because of the limitations. Amazon used to have a phrase called "Don't fear the constraints," and that's where you would take something like this and you just move it to EC2. You would spin up a few instances, build a SQL Server as you normally would, and run it on EC2. Obviously, that's difficult with the right people without having the right people in place. So this sort of halfway challenge it solves. Just worried about what the longer term repercussions would be. Is it actually going to get people to rethink their application, do something with it, or in 30 years' time, are you still going to be looking at a 2016 SQL box configured in the wrong way?
It's probably a way for AWS to onboard new customers, new enterprise customers. They shared this slide last year. And they said 96% of the companies are still running on-prem. So if they want to crunch this number, they need to help all companies to migrate to the cloud. And hey, it's a managed service.
Yeah, definitely. It certainly unlocks a lot of value in terms of the spend for customers. Okay, so yeah, I think that's enough about sort of database and analytics. I think we can get into that one for several hours. But yeah, so moving swiftly on. So networking and IoT, really, it sort of wraps it up into that one, but really more networking. So I think the first one that sort of struck me is sort of private 5G, the AWS private 5G. And from my perspective, yeah, you get all the equipment, it's all set up and everything else, but it's more about the why. There's going to be so few customers that are actually going to dive into this. So I could see huge manufacturing plants and huge, for example, cars, building cars, building something massive where you need a massive network to be able to cope with all of this, especially IoT elements and devices that you're talking to. But
it's the same like the ground station. If you need to communicate with satellites, I don't have a satellite. I don't have a 5G network. I don't know someone that runs his own 5G network. Maybe cyber companies will use it.
Yeah.
Usually, those companies they build their own. They build everything on-prem. They don't want to share it with clouds. Maybe not. We will see.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to see some use cases apart from the ones I've already mentioned. It's connecting thousands of devices and everything else, all very good, but we can do that with what we've got at the moment. So private 5G, it seems a very niche market. It seems very targeted at a very few customers, with a lot of fanfare to everybody else who's like, so never going to use it, never going to see it, but yeah, thanks is there. So yeah. All right then. One that I did quite like the look of, and this is the oh goodness, what's it called? Let me find it. There we go. AWS Cloud WAN, again in preview. So, creating that wide area network over AWS, you've been able to do a lot of that using transit gateways and VPCs and everything else, and being able to connect and to interconnect all of that to create your wide area network. What do you think of this, and what do you think it's going to help with in terms of what problem is it actually solving?
I think it makes you a much more simpler setup. So you have one place to manage everything. But all those services, all those products like Transit Gateway and some other stuff, they come with a cost. And I know a lot of companies that they prefer to use VPC peering, and they don't even use NAT gateway, and they don't use the network firewall, because for every byte that you transfer, you have this additional cost of processing bytes. And when you have so many projects, so many services in between, it becomes a really, really expensive thing. And for a lot of enterprises, it's the first thing you do in the cloud is you install everything. You want the RDT, and you want the network firewall, and you must have a NAT gateway, and you need to have the flow logs, and you're going to process and if you transfer 1 gigabyte of data, you pay for much more, or you generate much more data. So I do see enterprise companies, or maybe security companies, or companies that must run some kind of compliance that are going to integrate this. But for like friends that I know that work for companies with high traffic, I don't see how they are going to implement these features, because it's going to be expensive. So new features, simple setup, more money. That's the summary of that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've seen, certainly with a lot of customers in the past anyway, is that if you don't have something like this in place, you start to really dive into what is it that you're actually doing. I'm taking this from here to here. I don't really need to ship that to the US. I'm in the UK at the moment. I don't need to ship all of that data. What I really need to do is ship the end result, the answer, 42. There you go. I don't need to put all the base data along with it. So I start to optimize things for costs, for transmission, for security, for boundaries, for access and everything else. Try and keep it locally as much as I can, and where I do need to share, I'll use different things. Like EventBridge is a classic one. It's like, okay, I'll post it to EventBridge. It can be picked up in the US. They'll go and munge that data, take that data, and do whatever they need to do with it.
Or S3, for example, for large files. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, S3 is another easy way of doing it. Those sort of things. So, but I think you're right in terms of it's mostly enterprises that's going to be using this. But I think it'll also get misused. I think it will just be one of those things that it's like, okay, put a big WAN down and we'll transfer everything everywhere all the time. And then that's where the customer's going to get that shock horror bill. It's like, you've charged me how much for what? And it's like, all I did was build a WAN. It's like, yes. And all these other features that have gone on there as well. So I think it moves the goalpost away from, really focusing on what is it that we have to do. I'm going to have an API in front of an S3 bucket, which then shows you some data when you type in the name, whatever, done, really simple. But then you're going to have somebody like in, I don't know, Australia, going on a WAN all the way to the US to go and call that piece of data which is stuck in some bespoke database out there. And it's just like, because it's there, it's done, it's a piece of architecture that's already known. All we have to do is lift it, drop it into AWS, put the cloud WAN across it, and now I can use it. Also the most expensive way of doing it that could ever be conceived as well. So I think that it's nice that we can enable it, or Amazon have enabled it for their customers to be able to do this sort of thing. The simplification's nice. The sort of opinionated global control is really nice as well. I'm just worried that it's just one of those, it'll be seen as some sort of panacea, some sort of turnkey. I don't know what the back out plan is. Once you've implemented something like this and the customer comes to you and says, it's costing us too much, how do we get out of this? It's like, that's where those difficult conversations are going to have about, how are you actually moving this data about? But yeah.
And we see that with not gateway. We see customers that are complaining that they pay too much money. And then you can see when you aggregate the billing, you can see that the processing fees of not gateway are high in gigabytes, but the data transfer out to the internet is low. It's close to zero. And then you figure out that they probably go to S3 or DynamoDB or ECR or one of the regional services. And because it's outside of the VPC, you must go through the NAT gateway. And it's listed, by the way, in AWS documentation. At the bottom, there's a small note saying that consider using a VPC interface gateway for S3. So we see that a lot. It's the way that companies adopt services.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems this is more of an enabler rather than an educator. So rather than educating customers and saying, look, there's possibly a better way of doing this, not in all cases, in some cases, probably in most cases. But yeah, here's a set of tooling that can allow you to create an entire WAN. Sure, that's not going to cost much at all, especially over AWS. And we all know what those intercharges are like and how expensive they are as well. So yeah, I think it's a great tool to have there in terms of when you actually need it, but how many people actually need it. It's probably going to be just those huge enterprises with legacy applications again. Cool. All right. Moving swiftly on then. Let's see, the IoT Robo Runner for building fleets of management applications. I quite like the idea of the ability to create a simulated robot that can do things in a nice area where it's a workspace, for example, in virtual land, where I can play with these things and I can test them and everything else. But again, I'm not sure about the value to customers. How much of that do they actually need to do? And how much would something like this cost? Because effectively, you've invested in your hardware and now you're going to invest in the same hardware, but a virtualized version of the same thing. I don't know. Is it useful? Is it not?
I think maybe we missed something here. And our daily job is working with startups that are SaaS companies usually, and with a lot of innovation. But maybe in some other industries, there is a requirement for that. And if AWS build a product behind it, there's probably a huge industry that we are not aware of. But it is relevant for them.
Yeah.
Especially me, but I have a small amount of IoT devices. When I read books, I turn off my lights in my room with IoT, which is not that smart, not that technical, not that innovative. It's for a long time here already, but maybe in some other industries. We don't know everything. We don't see everything. So probably not in some other industries, it's more common or a requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems very niche again. So yeah. All right then. Well, up next is sort of monitoring and security. There's been several announcements made around improving that posture. And I think one of the ones that I quite liked was the AWS Shield Advanced automatic updates, for DDoS mitigation. We've obviously seen a lot of DDoS recently in terms of, the internet attacking various different bits and pieces. So anything that's actually going to help with that sort of DDoS protection to prevent it, I think is a good thing. What do you think of this latest update from Amazon?
So Shield used to be like an insurance plan alongside with technical support in a high level. So in case someone attacks you, you can reach AWS support. They will help you. And at the same time, you won't pay for the additional resources that you created to handle this attack. But still, you had to invest a lot of time and efforts to mitigate attacks. So now it's automatically, probably something like Cloudflare. So you just click, I'm under attack, and voila, they automatically protect your resources from DDoS attacks. I didn't see it running yet, and hopefully I will see it soon. But maybe we should do a POC. We should notify AWS security that we are going to attack a resource and see how it's going to handle our attack.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the layer 3 and layer 4 attacks were where it used to be at. Now we're seeing a lot more sort of layer 7 attacks as well. So, which are great for script kiddies and that sort of thing in terms of I can just run this thing and hey presto, I can take you down just by denial of service.
And it's much more sophisticated.
Yeah, exactly. And it's getting more nuanced as well. So there's a lot more sort of detail behind it as well, rather than just banging on someone's door overnight, so to speak. So for me, by putting that with CloudFront and all of those other bits and pieces, and I think the nicest thing is that you can enable it for no additional cost, but I don't know what the costs are for using Shield in the first place in terms of the advanced.
There is monthly cost, and I think there are two levels. I don't remember the prices exactly, but there is the Shield Advanced, I think. With a yearly commitment, you need to pay some amount per month, and you need to enable the resources that are protected by Shield. And then there is additional fee that you pay for that resource per request or data transfer. I'm not sure exactly about the pricing.
It will be on the website.
Yeah, it will be on the website.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the more of these sort of events that we can just prevent at source, so it almost doesn't even become news anymore. It's just like, a thing happened, but it was mitigated. Don't worry about it. Which is great for customers, and they can just keep delivering what they're delivering. So that's good. New Amazon RUM, so real user monitoring for CloudWatch. There's several tools that I know of out there in the industry that do just this. So they are sort of stepping on toes of existing products that actually give you this detail around what your application is doing, what the customer journey is looking like. Have you had the chance to look into RUM at all, the real user monitoring, and what it can do?
Not yet, but in general, CloudWatch is great, but it covers, let's say, 60% of what the average company needs. And then they reach to other companies, New Relic, Datadog, and some other companies to get the 100% coverage for their monitoring. So the more and more services that will be launched by AWS CloudWatch will probably the less new customers that Datadog will onboard, probably.
Yeah. So it's going to impact their revenue stream.
Maybe not, because moving to a different monitoring company, it's a long process. It takes time to replicate everything and make sure you cover. They need to run everything duplicate for a couple of weeks to make sure that you're covered. But I just think that's another layer of monitoring that eventually we will see CloudWatch provides the equivalent features that Datadog provides.
Yeah, they seem to. I mean, if you take something simple, for example, like Cost Explorer, they sort of go so far and then stop, so they're not stepping on people like Cloud Health's value proposition. Cloud Health does a lot of that extra detail that you just can't get from anything in there. And this seems like, along with a sort of X-ray and service lens and all sorts of other bits and pieces, it's a great tool in terms of, really getting that end-to-end journey and being able to understand what your customer experience is. I think a lot of it's done elsewhere already, and a lot of customers are already using that. It seems to follow the same model. Here's a piece of JavaScript, inject it into your website, and we can start gathering these data points for you. I think it's great for those digital natives that have just started on this journey, don't really know where to get this information. And there's now a set of tooling that they can integrate from the get-go. So born in the cloud, those sort of things. Really good. I can't see a mass migration of people using Datadogs and New Relic and all those sort of tools to suddenly use Rum. It attracts a few more dollars to the platform as well, making CloudWatch a bit more lucrative in terms of there's more data metrics coming through it. It would be nice to see some sort of aggregate of this service, where you can almost take this data that you've got in isolation and be able to compare it to other market vendors in that sort of area. That would be really nice in terms of what your journey looks like. And seeing as Amazon are collecting all of this data, I can't imagine it would be that hard to obfuscate some of the data and say, on average, customer's journey from this particular point to that particular point, you're above, below, or the same. So that gives you some sort of benchmarking to be able to get a profile of what does good look like. I think that would add a lot more value in terms of just having metrics for the sake of metrics. You don't really necessarily understand if that's a good thing or a bad thing when you're doing it. The only time you really understand it's a bad thing is when your customers are complaining about it. So sure, you can go to the monitoring, but something on top of this would be nice to get an aggregate view of it so that you're making a mistake or you're in the right ballpark anyway. Cool. Okay, so what else have we got there? Really, that's all we've got for sort of monitoring and security. And then I suppose one of the other things that I picked up on, which isn't in the category of the ones that we were talking about earlier, but I mentioned it, is the Migration Hub refactor spaces to incrementally refactor your applications. I don't know if you've seen this at all. It's a mouthful, but it's the Amazon AWS Migration Hub refactor spaces. So a new capability of Migration Hub to let you refactor your existing applications into distributed applications, typically based on microservices. So this is taking that sort of strangler pattern to its nth degree and sort of defining a process and a procedure around how to strangle your applications so that you can actually get a more modern view of what's actually happening here. So building out microservices, creating API gateways, all of that sort of side of it as well. I thought this was an interesting take on trying to solve that problem in terms of legacies, especially when you see a lot of the announcements at reInvent seem to be geared around enabling enterprises to move lock, stock, and two smoking barrels into AWS from on-prem or wherever they are. So what are your thoughts on something like this?
It's like jumping to a pool when you don't know how to swim.
That's a beautiful analogy. I got it straight away.
I'm trying to think to myself. I know friends that working for enterprises and the level of knowledge that they have. And if you give them this is I really don't know how it's going to work, but let's assume it's going to build API gateways and CloudFront and all the services around it. Let's assume we have a problem tomorrow and we got a notification from CloudWatch, for example. Then the sysadmin, or now you can title himself as a DevOps, what is he going to say? The first question will be, where is it? So I need to deep dive on this product, but I think for people that are new to the cloud, it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah. I think it's one of those fraught with dangers if you don't know what you're doing. Exactly as you described it about jumping into the pool when you don't know how to swim. It's like you might get lucky. The pool might only be a foot deep and you can just stand up and you're good to go. More than likely you'll jump into the deep end though. So you'll be asking for that life buoy to come out. So yeah, I just thought it was an interesting take on it. I think I'd like to see it. I wouldn't say in practice. I'd like to play with it just to see how well it does and what sort of things it exposes me to in terms of to your point about support, how do I make this go forward so that I can exchange this with the rest of the business, build out the business continuity around this? It's not just tech for the sake of tech. We're delivering services to customers at the end of the day. And like you said, if we don't know how to support that because architecturally the entire landscape's changed, where's that going to leave us? But I thought it was an interesting one. I like seeing these sort of things just because they help sort of demystify some of it. But at the same time, if you don't know what you're doing with any of it, it becomes quite a dangerous place to be. Okay. Community, right. So AWS have reimagined the Q&A experience for the community. And as a community builder yourself, I was wondering if you have a notion or a view on AWS, terrible name again, repost. So it sounds like something that you've just found from somewhere else and you're just reposting it there because you want to keep it all in one place. That's not the object of the exercise here at all. It's to build those communities, bring customers, partners, employees together so that you can share common architectures and views and everything else. But any views on this one?
The new Stack Overflow?
Yeah, basically. Why not use Stack Overflow?
That's it. I don't have anything to add. It's a new version of Stack Overflow, basically.
I mean, it's nice to see them sort of dipping into that community a bit more and understanding that they need to solve some of the challenges. Whether they've actually solved them or just moved the goalpost out of Stack Overflow and putting them into AWS, not sure. One of the things I thought was a bit odd when I tried to use it, and I gave up at this point because I had no real use case to use it. But if I wanted to sign in, I had to sign in through my AWS console, which I thought was I didn't like it. I didn't like that experience. I'd like, if I'm just interested in learning about it or learning about what AWS is doing, I don't want to have to go and create an AWS account or anything else. I don't want to be browsing. By all means, check that I am a person and not a bot and everything else. And I'll go and use my Gmail account and off I go. I can go and log in and everything's fine. And I can still do various bits and pieces. But to log in through your AWS account only, I thought that was quite restrictive in terms of who can actually contribute here anyway.
And you already have AWS forums.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's there already. Also, there is there's a bug when you skip from one account to the other, and as a CRA we skip multiple accounts every day, like 50, 60 accounts every day. There is something in the console that expands your cookie.
Right.
And then when you try to reach out to AWS forums, you get this Nginx error. They remarket this as AWS, but it's Nginx in the backend. With cookie length is too long, too big, too something. And then you need to open the forum in incognito, so you can't reply because you're in incognito. So maybe that's the way they're going to solve this bug. We created a new platform. I don't see the value for that. I think that Stack Overflow is much more. Even Reddit, it's much more more widespread.
Exactly. And it's understood. It's understood.
Time will tell. I'm reading a question right now. Can't receive emails on work accounts. And it says that it changes MX records and it waits for more than 72 hours.
Yeah.
The first thing that I will tell him is, listen, you don't need to wait 72 hours. You need to wait for the TTL. But someone answered him from AWS, and let's not get into it, but I just think that I think that Stack Overflow is a better solution.
Yeah. And it's already understood by the community anyway. And a lot more open as well. It's not just for AWS customers, it's for anybody. Cool. Okay, so last but certainly not least, well architected. It's something that we do an awful lot here at DoiT in terms of architectural reviews. We do technical kickoffs. We have a look at their architecture and understand it. So they've added a new pillar now. So, we've now got sustainability. And that's great. I've got an image here around sort of the sustainability of responsible for sort of in the cloud and I know of the cloud. It's sort of very similar to the shared responsibility model from the standard security practices and best practices and that sort of thing as well. So I like the idea of being able to quantify and therefore make a decision based on, the CO2 that I'm consuming or whatever that may be. And sure, we're optimizing for cost, but actually, sometimes we want to spend a bit more because it delivers it quicker because we need the answers quicker. And it would be nice to understand that that's the point where you're consuming more CO2. So it's up to you to make that decision. Do you actually really need it? So to have another lens on that sort of sustainability is really nice. The only thing for me that I thought was missing from this is that there's no tooling. There's nothing around it. There's a narrative, there's an extract of, what it's trying to help with and the various different areas. But I think it needs tooling to be realized so that you can understand what your CO2 is rather than we've got a narrative that explains that, computers use electricity and electricity comes from trees or produce CO2 anyway. So it's like, I'm not really sure what it's solving. And considering at reInvent 2020, I think it was, they announced a new sustainability pillar and we didn't really see much for a year. And then in a year's time, we've really got a diagram and another narrative. So what are your thoughts anyway?
They might improve it in the future, but you need to remember something. It's a huge thing in Europe, and that's it. Outside of Europe, in the US, in Israel, and some other markets, it's not that of a big deal. We're all aware of the entire subject, and we know it's important, and we print on the page from both of the sites to save paper. But I see this only in Europe, like outside of Europe, no one cares yet. Maybe in the future, maybe it will be more important in the future. But in Europe, even I think I remember that 15 years ago, if companies in Europe save electricity, they get tax benefits or something like that. It's only in Europe. So it's important. I don't see a manager in the Middle East ask his employee to check our CO2 consumption in the cloud. No,
Yeah.
it's a process. It's a long process. It might happen in the future. People in Europe are born into it. Outside of Europe, it's not that big of a deal. I am aware of the consequences and everything in beyond, but
I would love to have seen a bit of tooling, even if that tooling was quite naive around billing. Amazon know how much every item that we're spending on and know exactly how much it costs in terms of we're spending this much transactionally and that equates to this much of your bill. They know exactly what each of those items are. So produce an API where I've got a load of list items where I can scroll through the array and go, okay, these are all the things I've used. I've used 1 millionth of those. That will cost X amount of grams, kilograms, whatever it may be of CO2. And I could enumerate that tooling to say, okay, I am interested in solving this problem. I am interested in sort of contributing to reducing my carbon emissions to a point. I'm going to get to a point where it's actually not cost effective to do that. And I can make that decision. But a narrative really doesn't solve the problem. We know what the problem is. And I think, something that makes it a bit more real would help customers realize the consequences of what they're doing. And like you said, they may choose to just ignore it and go, yep, that's the cost of doing business. We need to do this. And we've got other mechanisms to offset carbon, or we don't even care. They're valid points. But it was more of an announcement. It's like we care about sustainability, but we're not going to enable you to do anything about it, apart from talking about it in an architectural review. But yeah, I think that leads neatly on to sort of the last point of today, really. I think we've covered all the events, but I think, I had the opportunity to go to reInvent for the first time as a customer. And it was lovely, a lovely, completely different experience than being an employee at Amazon in terms of working at reInvent. Um, it was well organized. They did all the right things in terms of the venues and those sort of things. So all of that, the sort of, I wouldn't say just marketing, but the marketing, the orchestration and all of that side, that was all done really well. And having a few years experience of walking around Vegas hotels and everything else, I could find everything pretty easy. So that side of it was okay. But I really didn't find reInvent very inventive. You know, there was very little innovation. A few bits and pieces, and you think, "Oh, that's quite cool," but it was more iterative than innovative. So I unfairly called it regurgitate earlier in another meeting, but it felt like here's a thing that we've just improved on a little bit.
Nothing new, nothing special. There was nothing that will make you say, "Wow, they reinvented the wheel." No, they maybe converted a few internal tools to public tools. So that's what I think. I also think the same.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much of that was based on an ability to hit a deadline in terms of reInvent comes around very quickly when you're working in Amazon. It comes around in sort of July, August time. You know, it's like, okay, you need to get ready now. So that side of it can be quite trying. I'm not sure how much of it is down to, you know, Bezos going his way, Jesse stepping up, and
I think that's the issue. That's the reason. You change when you replace the CEO, then everything changes. All the future plans and the place that we will invest more time, everything changes. This is probably the reason.
Yeah, a lot of pressure, a lot of changing, and a lot of change to some major moving parts within the organisation as well. So I'm not being, disparaging about reInvent. I just think they could have done either more or maybe not charge as much, you know, $1,800 $1,800 a person to sort of basically get an email, I suppose, or a hoodie. Would have done the same thing.
You get food for free.
Yeah, okay. I didn't eat there. I think I had a bagel once, but that was about it. But I think, you know, the networking side was awesome. Meeting up with colleagues, ex-colleagues, seeing what the partner landscape was doing. I think I spent an awful lot of time in the partner landscape talking to various different vendors about what they're doing and trying to understand what they're doing as well. That's all really good as well. But for me, that's always been the real draw of reInvent as well, in terms of networking, seeing people, and then occasionally get this wow factor that says, whoa, look what they've just released now. This really solves a problem moving forward. So, but yeah, that's about it really for me on reInvent anyway.
I pretty much share the same experience as you. This year I tried to achieve a lot and I didn't get much. Just running from one hotel to the other, running from one expo to a meeting room. It was. I tried to do a lot and managed to do much less. Yes, very little.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. I mean, don't get me wrong, DoiT. Thank you for the opportunity and sending me to reInvent. That was great. It was great to meet up with colleagues. A little scary about the flights and COVID and everything else, but all came back negative, so I'm happy. But yeah, so I think that's a wrap up from us as well. So I hope you've enjoyed our discussion today, and speak to you soon. So if there's anything you'd like to discuss about, with us about what we've talked about today, curious about how AWS works and how we can really enable your business, whether that's cost optimization, whatever, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to us via our website, DoiT-International or intl.com. But if you're an existing customer, get in touch with your account manager, the people you normally talk to. Come and give us a shout. We would love to talk to you. So with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you very much. Goodbye.